We're now joined by Dominic Dyer from the Badgers Trust, and I'd like to tell you why. The last time Dominic was here was only a couple of weeks ago. We were discussing how the badger cull, controversial as it is, had been newly extended to cover 11 new areas in England. The culling is now taking place in all in 32 areas across 10 counties, including Devon, Cornwall, Cumbria, Somerset, Staffordshire and Gloucestershire. Our farming minister said, George Eustice said not so long ago that it was working, reducing cases of bovine TB in the first two areas where culling took place, which memory serves me right was Gloucestershire and Somerset. And there, since 2013, George Eustice claims that bovine TB has halved. I suspect he'll have a much harder job, George Eustice, defending the latest scandal, though, to dog the cull. The Independent this morning reported how a badger was still moving almost a minute after being shot at point-blank range by marksmen, in inverted commas, up in Cumbria. If you haven't seen the video, I mean, it's pretty hard viewing, I have to say. The action was caught on camera, covert cameras, and it shows a badger locked in a cage. A man approaches the animal and shoots it. The body then convulses for about a minute before it finally stops moving, and the man later returns and retrieves the badger's body. Now, as you probably know, bovine TB is a massive issue for our farmers. Lots of animals, lots of cows are killed themselves. And the bill, of course, is picked up by us taxpayers. But this incident is certainly going to yank at all our emotional heartstrings, Dominic. Is it a fair criticism? I mean, a body convulsing, could it not just be the final twitches of death, the spasms of death?
Well, you've got Boris there, a taxidermy badger that we use taking into schools. So I brought him in so you could see the size, the weight, the power of this animal.
He's on our webcam now, actually, if you tune in. I might twist him around.
Very fine-looking creature, too.
He is.
Gorgeous.
This is the largest surviving carnivore we have in this country. We don't have bears and wolves anymore. We lost those hundreds of years ago. And these are large, very powerful, squat, muscular animals. And whatever you think about a badger, it's extremely difficult to kill. Be it by gassing, which they've done in the past, which is horrible, snaring, shooting.
Why? What are they?
Well, the head alone, if you think about that, the head is extremely powerful in the jaw. Often these animals get knocked over by cars, and they literally just go into a sort of semi-state of unconsciousness for a while, wake up, and then go on their way. They're that powerful, these heads in the jaw area. And, you can't easily just shoot one of these with one clean shot. I think what we see in this cage situation, and we've waited 5 years to get this footage, and as disgusting and horrible as it is to watch it, it is important because it brings home what's happening to these animals. 35,000 killed so far, another 42,000 could be killed this year, that's 75,000, and each of them could suffer this tragic, horrible dying. This was a cage. In some cases they're being free shots, so basically outside of cages, and in situations like that it's even worse. They can drag themselves off to die, and it could be 5-10 minutes for them to die.
I'll say again, when I'm fishing, if I ever take a fish for the pot after bashing it over its head, and I know from the move the eyes no longer move in relation to the plane that the animal is dead, and yet the body still twitches, the group behind the filming claim that vets have said it was suffering for a minute. Are we
That's
sure
right.
that was the case?
Well, I've seen the video in its entirety, and it is nearly a minute. And the Sunday Times had it for a few days before they broadcast it yesterday, and they had an independent vet, look at it. And interestingly enough, if you listen to the cull contractors who are doing this regularly, they're going to cages up and down the country killing badgers like this. And these guys who came along to kill this one were probably off to kill more that very day. And the guy that picked the badger out of the cage sort of asked the shooter, look, it seems to have moved over here. Maybe he was quite new to this. And the shooter clearly had done this before, had seen many others. And he said, no, that's what they do. They move around once we've shot them. They don't die immediately. So it's clear the badger is convulsing. It's clear that it's dying probably of organ failure and blood loss. It's quicker to die in a cage environment like that than a controlled free shooting environment. But it's still very painful and very cruel.
But Dominic, we shouldn't... I think we're missing the point that we shouldn't be killing them.
No.
They're a protected species.
Yes.
We should not be killing them. We should be injecting the cattle, injecting them. And from what I'm reading, it's actually not the badgers that are infecting them. It's actually dung and the grass. And
rats,
if you can,
deer,
and
other
slurry.
farmers.
Other cattle.
Absolutely.
Other cattle.
You've
The
got
one thing we
rats.
know in Cumbria where this badger has been killed is that the wildlife has got the disease from cattle. And the government have admitted that. Last year we had an outbreak in this particular area of the country, and it's been traced back to cattle coming in from Northern Ireland. And what happens, as I said last time I was here, it's a form of industrial pollution. It spills out of the cows. it goes into wildlife, rodents, it goes into deer, it goes into badgers. And as we saw in the Sunday Times last week, there's rising concern it's in domestic cats, even in lions, in zoos and safari parks. This is a real problem.
Can I play devil's advocate for a moment? On social media, in fact, earlier this morning, I saw a Hunt Sabs group from down in the West Country, and they were running photos of the cages, the traps that the badgers were in. And in some of the pictures, they're saying, "Oh, this one's illegal," but it didn't say how the cages didn't conform to licence regulations. My concern, with my devil's advocate hat on, is if defenders of badgers go out, find cages, traps that are set for badgers, how do we know they're not then interfering with them to make the cages illegal and thus undermine the marksmen going around their legal work?
Well, if people do go and get access to these cages and they choose to do that, they can do so. It's not something that we condone as a Badger Trust, but there are people that do this. If they find a cage, they will break the cage and open it and let the badger go. Right. I can assure you that cage is probably not going to be fit for purpose again. You, by the way, are paying for that cage, and I am. It's taxpayers' money. The crazy thing about killing the badger, as we saw in Cumbria, is it's probably cost the best part of £1,000 taxpayers' cost to cover the cost of that. That's policing, that's the cages, it's the equipment, it's the training, the monitoring, it's all the legal fees they're fighting in court to keep these policies.
George Eustace says bovine TB's gone down by half in the first 2 cull areas.
But you can't differentiate between what you've done with cattle and what might have happened with the badgers. The one thing we do know is they've not tested hardly any of the badgers. So of the 35,000, only 900 were tested. None of those, only around 3% showed late-stage TB, where they were a risk to other badgers and potentially cattle. So most of the badgers have no disease. What you are seeing is that you're tightening up on the controls in terms of the testing, the biosecurity, movement controls, use of slurry and other things. All these things need to be done. That is helping bringing the disease down. What George Eustace is doing is playing fast and loose with the facts and saying actually all the reduction in those areas is down to badger culling. He knows that's complete manure, but he says it anyway just to keep the justification going for this horrible policy, and that's an absolute disgrace.
It shouldn't be happening. I was looking up, and I know you're saying £1,000 a badger, but I actually looked up some statistics, and in one county it was costing 800,000 to do these badgers, and it was actually The Independent did an article that actually each badger is actually costing the taxpayer £76,000.
That was in Wales. That was in Wales, where the situation was so absurd there that they went through what was called a test, vaccinate and remove policy. So they were testing badgers and removing those that they considered had disease and letting others go. The cost of that was absolutely massive, and that's where that figure came in.
Now, but is it not costing that? It is because of the policing. I mean, the 800,000.
Absolutely ridiculous. The policing alone is costing around £750,000 a county, and if you go another 10, 11 counties areas, you're looking at another £10 million in policing alone this year.
It said the taxpayers got 16 million. Badger culls have cost the taxpayer more than £16 million. Why don't we just?
Does it tell you what the cost of bovine TB and the?
Not as much as that. I think if we had, what would you recommend?
It's about 80 million.
I think the tragedy of this is if we'd have spent all the money killing the badgers and vaccinating them, we would have vaccinated 70,000 plus badgers rather than trying to kill them. That would have reduced the disease, because if that animal there you see does not have TB and you vaccinate it, you reduce its chances of catching the disease by over 70%. If it gives birth to a cub, you reduce a similar level the chances of that animal getting the disease. So we know every badger you vaccinate, and we can microchip them these days to trace them and get them back and vaccinate them again, is having a significant impact in lowering that disease. When you kill them, we have no way of knowing. It's indiscriminate. You're not testing.
You seem to have crossed a line yourself. Well, that's certainly one of the allegations I read at the weekend on the publishing of contractors' contact details with regard to badger.
That's something that the Badger Trust has been very clear about from the very beginning. We do not condone the release of that information. We've been very clear in the media. I've been quoted on a number of occasions. That was by other groups, activist groups that did that. We don't want to see any threats or intimidation to farmers. We think it's completely counterproductive. We want to see peaceful democratic protest against this. But what I would say is I fully support the Hunt investigation team, that a professional surveillance unit, by going into the countryside. They didn't threaten and intimidate anyone doing this. They did something that was a public service, because the government has spent tens of millions of pounds the secrecy of this slaughter to stop us seeing where our taxpayers' money's been spent. What the Hunt investigation team did is give us direct evidence of the cruelty of this this cull.
Dominic Dyer, thank you very much for giving up your time. Thank you for bringing in Boris. Did you say his name? Has it always been
indeed.
Boris?
It has always been Boris. I didn't just make it up today because it was
Boris
Dean's
Badger.
former foreign secretary. No,
It's a pre-Johnson badger.
Is it a he? Would it
It's
be
a he, we
It's an
believe, yes,
absolutely
it is.
magnificent
It is. It brings it
truly
home to you, doesn't it?
And we
It's
don't want to lose
gorgeous.
these. We keep culling them. We could lose these animals from where they've lived all the way since the Ice Age. So this is a very
We're in
important. So I'm
danger of
saying to
wiping
everyone
them out.
actually to
Yeah.
finish today, contact your MP, send them the video and ask them, is it right to spend £1,000 cage trapping and killing that badger when we could vaccinate and release it for less than £200? And let every MP answer that question.
Dominic Dyer from the Badgers Trust, thank you very much once again. Your passion radiates through. Thank
Thank
you.
you.